Hey everyone, today we are trying something a little different. If you've been here for a while, you know my channel is usually all about history and mythology. But every once in a while, I stumble onto something that hits a little closer to home. Something that I wish I could fit into this space. Now is one of those times. So while the film Wicked isn't a history or mythology topic, it truly felt like a historic event to a lot of us. And I wanted to dive deep into my personal takeaway from the film, through a lens I haven't seen a lot of accurate analysis for. Now, what my real life friends who might be watching know about me is that I'm a huge musical theater dork. So it probably won't be a surprise to learn that I've now seen the new Wicked movie 8 times. But hey, who's counting? When I first read the novel and then later saw the stage version, I was hooked. The music, the spectacle, and the rawness of the characters was transformative. Plus, I've always loved a story where you get to learn how the villain became the villain. It resonated a lot for reasons that I guess I had never put a lot of thought into. But then, sometime during my third viewing of the movie, something clicked. Elphaba's story isn't just about defying gravity. It's about surviving the injustice of trauma. And the more I looked, the more I realized her journey is a truly profound depiction of the effects of true clinical narcissistic abuse and the complex dynamics of those relationships. And I don't mean the casual way people use the term these days. It's not about a friend who set boundaries, an ex who wanted something different, or someone who hurt their feelings once. I'm talking about the real thing. The kind of abuse that is systematic, calculated, and often invisible. It happens subtly, right under people's noses, often in their homes, without anyone realizing it. But it's real. It's the kind of abuse that leaves lasting scars. It destroys self-esteem, isolates victims, and warps their sense of reality. This isn't about selfishness or someone being rude. This is about manipulation and control. It's the deliberate weaponization of trust in relationships. Let's talk about why this distinction matters, what it teaches us about standing up for ourselves, and how we can protect the people who might be suffering in silence. You see, narcissistic abuse is a topic that's deeply personal to me. It's shaped so much of who I am and how I see the world. And when I looked at Elphaba's story through that lens, I realized there was something much deeper happening in her journey, something that's worth unpacking. Before we get into this, though, I need to give you a little disclaimer. Because, listen, I'm not trying to ruin Wicked for anyone. I've loved Oz since I was a kid. I read all the books, and the classic film was a frequent way my family came together. And the creepy sequel? One of my all-time favorites. Between Return to Oz and Never-Ending Story, my whole generation is no stranger to being traumatized by kids' movies. I know my fellow elder millennials can relate. I've also been a diehard fan of Wicked since the book first came out, and I respect its intentions and themes deeply. That said, this video looks at Wicked through the lens of narcissistic abuse. I'm not going to pretend this interpretation is always perfectly aligned with the originally intended themes of Wicked, or the characters' full motivations. However, the way these dynamics play out in the story is unintentionally a masterfully accurate and elegant portrayal of this very real toxic dynamic. It's the best example I've ever seen put to film. And I think this alternative interpretation could help clarify a lot of these dynamics with a trauma-informed perspective, especially to the people who can see themselves in Elphaba's story for these reasons, like I did. So don't freaking come for me, all right? This isn't about changing anyone's interpretation or love for the story. I would hate to be the cause of that. It's about using Wicked's brilliance to shed light on a topic that's painfully relevant for so many people. And, as you'll soon learn why, is so very difficult to explain. So today, we're going to explore how Elphaba's story mirrors the experiences of people who've survived narcissistic abuse. This is a little different from my usual content, as I said, but I think you'll find it as fascinating and meaningful as I do. And if you don't, no worries. We will get back to history and mythology tomorrow. But research shows that about 1 in 10 people experience severe emotional trauma, often involving the manipulation and gaslighting we associate with narcissistic abuse. That means there's a good chance someone you know or love could benefit from this deep dive. So even if it's not your thing, consider giving it a share anyway. Also, this obviously contains full-on spoilers for the Wicked movie, Act 1 and 2 of the musical, and parts of the book. This video needs a trigger warning too, if it wasn't obvious, because it explores themes related to real cycles of emotional and psychological abuse. You can find links to victims' resources in the description. Now let's get into it. Elphaba's story begins with her father, Frexpar, whose rejection of her defines much of her early trauma. Frexpar's disdain for Elphaba is more than a personal failing. It's rooted in his need to maintain control and protect his own reputation. Her green skin is a visible marker of her difference, so she becomes an easy target for his scorn and an excuse for his neglect. In real life, this reflects a classic dynamic in narcissistic families: the scapegoat and the golden child. Frexpar casts Nessa Rose as the golden child, a perfect, fragile daughter who reflects his carefully curated image of respectability. Meanwhile, Elphaba becomes the scapegoat, unfairly burdened with blame for the family's struggles and treated as an embarrassment. This dynamic isn't just about favoritism, it's a tool for control. Narcissistic parents elevate one child to reinforce their own ego while tearing the other down to maintain power. This is to keep the scapegoat in a state of compliance. The psychological consequences of this are profound. Scapegoated children often grow up feeling they are inherently unlovable or flawed. They learn to suppress their needs and emotions, prioritizing the wants of others, to avoid conflict or further rejection. Elphaba's green skin symbolizes this alienation. It's not just a marker of her otherness in society. It's a visual representation of the shame and rejection projected onto her by her father. The constant reminder of her difference isolates her further, shaping her identity and reinforcing her role as the family outcast. Even Nessa Rose's dependence on Elphaba reveals another layer of the dysfunction. While Frexpar dotes on Nessa Rose publicly, he forces Elphaba to shoulder the burden of her care, trapping her in the role of caretaker while denying her any recognition or gratitude. This is a hallmark of narcissistic families, exploiting the scapegoat's empathy and sense of responsibility while denying them the love and validation they desperately need. Frexpar's rejection and manipulation create a foundation of shame, resentment, and self-blame that will follow Elphaba into adulthood, shaping her relationships and how she views herself. Elphaba's arrival at Shiz isn't part of some grand plan to give her a fresh start. Originally, it's just about dropping Nessa Rose off for college. But when Madame Morrible recognizes Elphaba's extraordinary potential, plans shift. Suddenly, she's allowed to stay. For a brief moment, it seems like this could be the beginning of something better. A fresh start, where she can step out of Nessa Rose's shadow and actually make something of herself. But if you've survived narcissistic abuse, you know that escaping its effects isn't as simple as changing your location. Elphaba brings her wounds with her to Shiz, and it doesn't take long for the school's social dynamics to remind her that she'll always be different. Enter Galinda Upland of the Upper Uplands. On the surface, Galinda is everything Elphaba isn't: popular, adored, and effortlessly charming. But beneath the sparkle, Galinda is the textbook grandiose narcissist. She craves attention, admiration, and has little regard for the feelings of those she manipulates. She's effortlessly popular, magnetic, and manipulative, a master of crafting her social dominance without ever seeming like she's trying too hard. But as with any narcissist, her charm comes at the expense of others. Upon meeting Galinda, Elphaba is instantly repulsed. And it's no mystery why. Of all the subtypes of narcissistic personality disorder, the grandiose narcissist is the easiest to spot. Galinda's ostentatious charm, her need for constant admiration, and her effortless manipulation of social dynamics are red flags that even someone without Elphaba's sharp instincts would notice. But Elphaba, who has spent her life navigating rejection and insincerity, sees these warning signs for exactly what they are. At least for now. She isn't taken in by Galinda's charm, and this clarity sets the tone for their immediate hostility. Before long, we come to the iconic song, Loathing, where Elphaba and Galinda lay their cards on the table with mutual disgust. On the surface, it's a comical moment, complete with over-the-top descriptions like, "My skin is crawling." But beneath the humor, Loathing reveals critical insights about both characters' personalities and how their immediate reactions to each other are shaped by deeper dynamics. For Galinda, the instant revulsion toward Elphaba is rooted in classic narcissistic behavior. The threat of being overshadowed by someone she deems inferior compels her to reclaim her position as number one, no matter the cost. Elphaba's intelligence, natural power, and raw authenticity present a stark contrast to Galinda's carefully curated image of perfection. Narcissists are known to respond with hostility when confronted with someone who challenges their perceived superiority or calls into question the facade they've worked so hard to maintain. Elphaba's very existence does both. Elphaba, in turn, is repelled by Galinda's shallow performative nature. For a woman who has spent her life being rejected for her appearance and who values substance over style, Glinda's obsession with popularity and appearances feels like an affront. But Elphaba's dislike isn't just about personality differences. It's the instinctual defense of someone who recognizes manipulation and insincerity when they see it. The song also gives us a glimpse into Galinda's tendency to weaponize charm and social dominance, which we see time and time again throughout Wicked. Her immediate smear campaign against Elphaba roping others into her unadulterated loathing is a classic narcissistic tactic. Narcissists often triangulate, pulling others into their conflicts to solidify their power and isolate their perceived threats. Galinda's ability to turn an entire group against Elphaba so quickly reveals her skill at wielding her popularity like a weapon. What's notable here is that it's not just about disliking Elphaba. It's about ensuring that everyone around her shares that dislike, reinforcing Galinda's position as the center of attention. That's the difference. For Elphaba, the effects of this public rejection are devastating. Already ostracized for her appearance, she now finds herself even further alienated, with Galinda orchestrating a hostile environment. The lyrics, "Every little trait, however small, makes my very flesh begin to crawl," aren't just exaggerated insults. They're a precursor to the kind of devaluation we see later in narcissistic dynamics. Galinda's loathing is performative, calculated, and entirely self-serving. But what makes loathing so brilliant is that it captures the seeds of a toxic dynamic that will only deepen as the story progresses. Both women embody aspects of insecurity and power struggles that keep their relationship charged with conflict. While Galinda leans on her narcissistic tendencies to maintain control and superiority, Elphaba's reactive distrust and defensiveness make her a challenging target. This push-pull dynamic keeps their relationship volatile but fascinating, as neither one fully concedes power to the other. In many ways, Loathing is the musical's way of foreshadowing the complexity of Glinda and Elphaba's relationship. A connection rooted in rivalry, envy, and mutual misunderstanding. And for fans of Wicked, it's also a turning point where we see both characters begin to define themselves against the other. Take the incident with Nessa Rose and Bach. Bach is clearly infatuated with Galinda, but to Galinda, he's just another tool to manipulate. She uses his admiration to get him to do her bidding, suggesting he ask Nessa Rose to the Ozdust ballroom as a way to keep him away from her and preserve her social standing. It can also be seen as a prime example of virtue signaling, something the grandiose narcissist is an expert at. With Fiyero there to witness her kindness, she can avoid any consequence and make herself look like a kind and good person. To Galinda, this is a harmless game. She's not thinking about how this affects Nessa Rose or Bach, because narcissists often lack the capacity for empathy when their own convenience is at stake. But Elphaba sees through it immediately. When Nessa Rose gushes over Galinda's suggestion, Elphaba warns her sister, trying to protect her from what she recognizes as a cruel prank. But Nessa Rose, conditioned by years of golden child treatment, dismisses her sister's concern. This dismissal cuts deep, because it's yet another reminder to Elphaba that no one values her insights or believes in her intentions. And then there's Fanny and Shenshen, Galinda's two loyal followers. In narcissistic dynamics, enablers like these play a critical role. They provide constant validation to the narcissist, reinforce their ego, and assist, often unwittingly, in their manipulations. For Galinda, Fanny and Shenshen act as a social echo chamber. They encourage her worst impulses while shielding her from accountability. When Galinda contemplates giving Elphaba the hat, Fanny and Shenshen gleefully encourage the idea, not because they have anything personal against Elphaba, but because their loyalty to Galinda demands it. This kind of enabling is a hallmark of grandiose narcissists. Enablers not only support the narcissist's behaviors, but also act as intermediaries, ensuring that their victim is isolated and without allies. Fanny and Shenshen's complicity ensures that Galinda's manipulations remain unchecked, amplifying the harm she causes. The dynamic between Galinda and her enablers also reveals another painful reality for survivors of narcissistic abuse. Even people who might not have malicious intent themselves can contribute to the cycle of harm. By backing Galinda's actions, Fanny and Shenshen provide the reinforcement she needs to maintain her dominance over others, including Elphaba. That's when Elphaba storms in like a gale, ready to shove Galinda's attitude right back up to the upper uplands. Her protective instincts toward her sister are unshakable. Even though her magic has already caused chaos in the past, she can't ignore what she sees as another slight against Nessa Rose. Her need to protect her sister is so deeply ingrained, it's practically primal. It's a raw, righteous energy, born out of years of being the scapegoat yet still feeling responsible for the golden child's well-being. But then, Galinda pulls the rug out from under her. Instead of meeting her with more cruelty, Galinda offers Elphaba her own hat. The hat that, just moments ago, she had derided as hideous, a cast-off that she'd only give to someone she truly despised. But Elphaba doesn't know that. To her, this small gesture, a breadcrumb of what looks like kindness, is transformative. She spent so much of her life starved for affection, for even the smallest sign that someone might see her as more than her green skin or her otherness. This moment, cruelly enough, blindsides her. In her desperation for connection, she misreads Galinda's gesture. Instead of recognizing it as a trick, she sees it as a precious gift. So much so that her anger dissipates entirely and she's overcome with gratitude. Elphaba doesn't just accept the hat, she elevates it. She holds it with reverence, cherishing what she thinks is an olive branch. And in her overflowing gratitude, she does something remarkable. She speaks up for Galinda. She demands that Galinda's dreams be made real, guaranteeing her a spot in Madame Morrible's coveted sorcery program. This is breadcrumbing in action. Narcissists and those who mirror their behaviors excel at offering just enough positive reinforcement to keep their targets hopeful, to keep them engaged. For survivors of narcissistic abuse, even the tiniest gesture of kindness can feel monumental. In this moment, Elphaba sacrifices her righteous anger, her instincts about Galinda's manipulations, for the fleeting feeling of being seen and valued. It's a cruel twist of the knife because Galinda's kindness isn't kindness at all. It's another tool in her arsenal to maintain control and power. That night, there was a party in town at a nightclub called the Ozdust Ballroom. It was the innest place for the innest people, and many students were planning to sneak out to attend. The excitement was palpable. The students arrive at the ballroom and everyone's dressed to kill, ready for a night of socializing and status games. Galinda, as usual, reigns supreme, the very picture of the school's queen bee. Her social dominance is clear. Her clique of enablers, Fanny and Shenshen, orbit her like satellites, while her super hot boyfriend Fierro, who's an actual freaking prince, whisks her around the dance floor. She is adored and envied, and she knows it. Meanwhile, Madame Morrible arrives, handing Galinda the coveted wand, a symbol of her acceptance into the sorcery program. This moment is significant, not because of Galinda's achievement, but because of the revelation that Elphaba had selflessly advocated for her. Elphaba risked her own standing to make Galinda's dream come true. Here's where interpretation diverges. Some see Galinda's reaction as a moment of redemption, a pang of guilt followed by an attempt to make amends. But let's be real. Guilt in a narcissist often stems from self-preservation, not empathy. Galinda knows she's in a precarious spot. Whether she overheard murmurs from nearby partygoers or noticed Madame Morrible still lingering, Galinda likely understood that failing to show gratitude could tarnish her flawless image. Then comes Elphaba's entrance. For a moment, everything seems perfect. She adjusts her hat, a confident smirk crossing her face. She's ready to enjoy the party, a rare moment of joy and hope for someone who has spent her life in the shadows. But the moment she appears, the room falls silent. Even the music stops as whispers ripple through the crowd. This is the kind of collective humiliation that trauma survivors know all too well, a sudden, isolating shift that erases their confidence in an instant. Elphaba descends the staircase with practiced stoicism, her face betraying only the smallest cracks in her emotional armor. Years of enduring ridicule have taught her to hide her pain, but for anyone who's been in her shoes, the hurt is palpable. She scans the room for a friendly face, but even Nessarose, her own sister, refuses to meet her gaze. The golden child, as always, protects herself first. She can't even watch. And in that moment, the weight of her isolation becomes crushingly clear. The camera cuts to Galinda, who hesitates. Ariana Grande's performance here suggests genuine remorse, but let's dig deeper. Galinda knows the power she holds over the room. Her next move will dictate the narrative, either cementing her as the good-hearted leader or exposing her as callous and self-serving. But before Galinda acts, it's Fierro who quietly intervenes. His unexpected compliment about Elphaba shifts the dynamic, prompting Galinda to step in and join the dance. Whether this is an act of redemption or strategic self-preservation depends on interpretation. From a narcissistic abuse lens, it's hard to ignore the timing. Once Fiero's attention is on Elphaba, Galinda's choice to dance with her becomes a calculated move to maintain her dominance, not a selfless act of kindness. As Elphaba begins to dance alone, reactions among the partygoers seem to split. The well-dressed elites laugh and point, reinforcing her alienation. Meanwhile, the students in more modest homespun attire flinch and back away, their fear underscoring the power dynamics at play. When Galinda finally joins in, it's framed as a moment of solidarity, a bridge between the outcast and the queen bee. But to survivors of narcissistic abuse, this is textbook virtue signaling. By making a grand gesture, Galinda not only absolves herself of guilt, but also solidifies her image as Galinda the Good. Her decision sets off a chain reaction. The crowd follows her lead, their laughter transforming into applause. Elphaba, starved for kindness, interprets this as genuine acceptance. But for those attuned to the manipulation, it's clear that Galinda's actions are less about helping Elphaba and more about maintaining her own reputation. As the dance ends, Elphaba's stoic facade finally cracks. Tears stream down her face, a mix of relief, gratitude, and the overwhelming release of years of pent-up pain. Galinda wipes away her tears and embraces her in what appears to be a heartfelt moment. But then comes the tell. As they pull apart, Galinda glances around the room, ensuring everyone has witnessed her magnanimity. It's a subtle but damning gesture, revealing the performative nature of her kindness. This moment also marks a significant shift in Elphaba's perception. Up until now, her sharp instincts have served her well, allowing her to spot Galinda's narcissistic red flags for what they are. But in this vulnerable moment, those defenses fall away. Elphaba, starved for connection and validation, begins to gift Galinda something dangerous: true trust and loyalty that hasn't been earned. This dynamic isn't uncommon in the cycle of narcissistic abuse. Victims, yearning for acceptance, often become blind to the red flags they once recognized. Over time, this trust transforms into a trauma bond, a psychological trap that makes it nearly impossible to see the abuser's actions for what they truly are. Even when others point out the harm or manipulation, the victim may defend the abuser, convinced that they're misunderstood, or even that the abuse was somehow deserved. Elphaba's growing attachment to Galinda mirrors this process. From this point forward, she begins to rationalize and overlook behavior that, under any other circumstances, would be unacceptable. Whether it's Galinda's public displays of dominance, her subtle put-downs, or her calculated moments of kindness, Elphaba chooses to interpret them as genuine. This blindness is not a sign of weakness, but rather a testament to the power of the trauma bond, a bond so strong that it can convince someone to rewrite their own memories, excusing pain as love and manipulation as care. In this scene, Galinda's ability to perform kindness while maintaining control reflects her mastery of this dynamic. For survivors of narcissistic abuse, moments like these can be devastating, as they often lead to years of self-doubt and confusion. But for now, Elphaba's walls are down and her loyalty is sealed, a decision that will shape the rest of her journey. It's here that Galinda's tactics shift into a new phase. After the dance, Elphaba is desperate to believe she's finally found someone who sees her as more than a burden. The two share what seems like an intimate moment, what survivors of narcissistic abuse might recognize as a calculated step toward creating a trauma bond. She suggests they tell secrets. Galinda casually reveals that she plans to marry Fiero, though he doesn't know it yet, setting herself up as vulnerable and relatable. This disclosure isn't as much a secret as it is a way to draw Elphaba in, encouraging her to reciprocate with something much deeper.